broadcast is now starting.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the PixelMill Webinar Series and today's offering of high-value scenarios for Microsoft Teams. As usual, my name is Michael Wells. I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at PixelMill, as well as your neighborhood-friendly bald guy with a beard. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all here today. If you haven't joined us before, welcome. Happy to have you for the first time. If you're joining us for the, if you've joined us before, welcome back, of course. I actually want to start out today with a little bit of different kind of news. If any of you have been with our webinars before, you are used to Mr. Eric Overfield, who has been a speaker a lot and has contributed to other webinars as well. We want to send our sincerest congratulations, our president and co-founder. His son was born yesterday. So he and his wife are, of course, very happy. Both baby and mother are doing very well, but we wanted to share that amazing news with our webinar friends and community. So if you get a chance to reach out to Eric, say something to him, we'd love to hear from you. But anyway, back on topic. We're here for a webinar today, right? So if you have questions or comments or anything, there is a questions tab and a chat tab. Feel free to use those at any time. I will be monitoring the questions as we're going through, and I will try to sneak those into our speaker as we go through. Without further ado, I think that's kind of it. Let me introduce our speaker today. She comes all the way from Seattle, Washington. She's really cool. She's going to teach you a lot about Teams. Give it up for Erica Toelle. Take it away.
Woohoo, here I am. Hey everyone, good to see you. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And of course, congratulations, Eric and Anna. So excited for your new son. So really quick, you can see my screen, is that right?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, great. So I'll just jump into the slides then. So just as a bit of an introduction, I'm Erica. I'm the product evangelist for RecordPoint, which is a records management and compliance add-in for SharePoint and Office 365, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. So Teams is my favorite product right now, and don't tell SharePoint. I haven't been so excited about something since SharePoint originally came out, and we'll kind of tell you a little bit why in this presentation. So I have a long history using Microsoft Teams. So first started using it in August of 2016, actually, and the product wasn't even announced until November. And that's because they invited a select group of people to get to try out Microsoft Teams before it was even announced. And let me tell you, that was the hardest secret I've ever had to keep in my entire life, because I just knew it was going to be such a game changer for collaboration. Then after Microsoft Teams was actually announced, I worked with the Microsoft Teams product group to develop a bunch of go-to-market materials around different roles and how you could use Teams to add value to those roles. As part of that project, I got to interview everyone that was using Teams in November of 2016 to find out what had added value and what had worked and not worked for them. And a lot of that research and then conversations and learnings I've had since that point, you know, a year and a half later now, are what are in this presentation. So this is based on real world experience and kind of a meta view of how people are getting value from Microsoft Teams. So moving on. So first thing that people always ask, even to this day, about Teams is, how does it fit into Office 365? So let's just cover that really quickly and get it out of the way. So first of all, it is part of a suite of products that we have in Office 365 around collaboration. However, it's a little different and it complements these others. So of course, we will always have Outlook, which is mail and calendar, because Teams is not a replacement for email. It might reduce the volume of your email as things are moved more to a chat interface, especially among your immediate team members and people you work with most closely. But you're still going to need email for more official communications, for communicating with people external to your organization, and just anytime you really need to be sure something was actually seen. And of course, the calendar functionality as well. So Microsoft Teams is more of a chat-based workspace. So what it's trying to do is bring that immediate chat functionality to these other collaboration areas. So you can have more of those real-time conversations in an area where anyone can see it, so you're working more openly, and where people can then go back and see that history and conversation, say if they were to join the team at a later date or they needed to reference something. Skype is also chat functionality, as you know, but those tend to be the more one-on-one conversations. And then it's hard, even though you can find the conversations folder in Outlook, it is just difficult to search and use that. And Skype for Business is still used for voice, video, and meetings, but they have announced that Skype for Business will become a part of Microsoft Teams in the future, and there is a very clear roadmap around what functionality will be released when in Microsoft Teams. So if you're concerned about that, please take a look. You can also use other kind of voice and video functionality in Teams, which we'll show you a little bit later in the presentation. And you also don't necessarily need Skype for Business in order to use that voice and video functionality in Teams. There are some other services you can use. I should have looked at the list before this meeting. I forgot to do that, but I'll go ahead and post that in the follow-up where to get that list of other providers you might be able to use. Then, of course, we have our Office client, which allows for co-authoring if you're using Office 365 or SharePoint Online. And then it's also the same co-creation and co-authoring capabilities are used in Microsoft Teams. So if you love using that, still available. We have OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online to share content. And actually that's what Teams is using in the background when you share a file. It's either going to be shared to OneDrive or to SharePoint, just depending on whether you're sharing that file in an actual team or in a one-on-one chat. And then finally, we still have our enterprise social tool, Yammer, which you may or may not use, but that's really great for driving conversations across the entire organization. Like, let's say you want to have an executive have an open chat or an open forum with the whole company. Yammer is a tool that's much better suited for that scenario than Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is more for smaller groups of people. There are no hard and fast rules for where that cutoff point is, but I've been in Microsoft Teams, you know, with more like 20 people and then one with like 500. And the one with 500 people, it was just too much content. It was spread across too many channels and the conversations were flying by too quickly. And it was quite hard to follow what was happening in that team. Just the way the user interface is and the functionality, Yammer probably would have been a better tool to use in that case. And if we start looking at the different collaboration use cases across these different areas, you can see very quickly how they're different. Now, Teams, we'll see in a second, is cool because you can actually bring Yammer into a team. You can bring the SharePoint files and then the Skype voice and video messaging. So in addition to providing the chat functionality, it's also a great way to bring these different collaboration tools into one user interface for your users. And then just to kind of bring it in, Office 365 Groups is another functionality that provides a team workspace, a calendar, and files and a couple other things. It is being used in the background for Microsoft Teams. So when you create a team, it creates a corresponding Office 365 group, a calendar, and whatnot. So it's more used to manage security now than necessarily for collaboration. Teams is kind of replacing that. So then if we start looking at Microsoft Teams, these are some ways that you might be able to use Teams across different organizations or departments. So this is a slide that came directly from those interviews that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So when we interviewed these companies that were using Teams, that were getting a lot of success from it, and we asked them, well, like, what are you actually doing? These are the things that they mentioned. So if you're just getting started, this might be a way to roll out Teams to your organization. So you might go to sales and say, hey, you know, Teams is a great way to collaborate on sales opportunities. So typically in an opportunity, I'm taking kind of a consulting lens on this because that's my experience, but you might have like an account manager who is managing that account on an ongoing basis. And then you might have the salesperson who has expertise in specific solutions that that customer might not already be using. They might work together on the sales opportunity. So what's an easy way for them to collaborate and stay up to date, especially if you know, that salesperson's working across multiple accounts or even working in different offices or different geographies. Teams is a great way to chat and communicate, share files, and have everything in one place related to that account. So then you might bring in subject matter experts. Maybe you need their help developing the pricing for a proposal. Again, they can be added later after some of this stuff has been happening, and they can go back and see that history and conversation and the files that people have shared. And on an ongoing basis after the sale is complete, this can be a great way to escalate issues or do account management as well. For marketing, this is a great way to coordinate events, press releases, anything where you might be editing a document and people might want to have a discussion about that document, but maybe you're in different time zones, so it's difficult to have a meeting. Teams is a great way to do that. You can also do things like use the Teams connectors, which I'll show you later in the presentation, so that when you post stuff to social media or someone mentions you, it'll go to the team. You can have a discussion about it, and then someone can go out and post publicly on Twitter or whatever what your team has decided is the correct answer. Project management I see as the #1 use case for teams. So I bet a bunch of you have been using SharePoint for a couple years now, and maybe at one point you decided to create a project template, a project site template in SharePoint. And a lot of times in my experience, those weren't ever heavily used by projects. Maybe it was overkill. They really just needed a place to store their documents, and it confused them to have all these other things in the template. Well, Teams, I think, is a much better option for small projects now, where you don't need to coordinate resources or do enterprise level planning for those projects. Maybe they're more ad hoc, or they just are smaller, so they don't require that level of management. Teams, I think, is the perfect size solution for that. And then another department that seems to really like Microsoft Teams is engineering. So if you're working with developers, maybe they have daily stand-ups. They can have those daily stand-ups using Teams video, and it's much more personable and like a face-to-face discussion, which we'll show you in a second. Also, you can use the tabs and connectors to integrate with developer tools like Jira, other code repositories, bug fixing or bug tracking systems, other things like that. And then finally, this one wasn't as popular, but it was gaining more traction around finance functions, especially around budgeting planning or anything where finance needed to coordinate with other departments around setting a budget, what spends were versus actuals, and getting purchase orders approved and fulfilled. Those kind of things that required coordination, Teams found a lot of success helping with those. So I'm sure we'll give out the slides after the presentation, but just down here, if you want to get a 50-page white paper where it details out each one of these areas and how you might actually configure the channels and the tabs in your team to do these things, you can get that white paper at that link. So then I want to take a look at Teams and Yammer. So at Ignite, they introduced the idea of what they called an inner loop and an outer loop. I'm not the biggest fan of this name. Like, I call it maybe an inner circle and outer circle would have been better. Like, why are we looping all of a sudden? I don't know. But basically the idea is you have an inner group of people, like a more close-knit team that you work with on a regular basis, typically, where you're working with them on the daily, versus people you might coordinate with less frequently. Maybe it's people in other departments or people that maybe you need to just work with on more of a weekly or monthly or even less frequent basis. or communication like more openly across the organization, like that executive example that we talked about earlier. So how can we kind of think about using Teams to bridge these together?
Oh, real quick, a question came in before you move on to that.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it.
Our first question from our friend Vaughn. Teams for project management. Can you achieve a team or apply retention?
Oh, retention, my favorite topic.
I had a
Okay,
feeling.
so I literally have a whole presentation on this because it is a little bit more of a complicated answer. And that's because Teams is bringing together these other services into one user interface. So for Teams chats and Teams conversations, yes, you can apply retention. It was actually a feature that was just released 2 weeks ago. I think it's still being rolled out to first release customers. So it might not show up in your tenant yet. I think I checked 2 days ago, it wasn't in my tenant yet. But you will be able to apply a retention policy specifically to those areas. When you start talking about the files that are shared in Teams, maybe you have a tab with planner tasks, the retention is managed in that service. So the files in Teams sit in SharePoint and OneDrive. So retention would be driven based on SharePoint and OneDrive policies. We're going to send out a recap of this, right? I think. So
yes, we are. Sorry, I was muted still. Yes.
So what I'm going to do is send you the link to the slides that go over the retention in detail in Teams because it's just too hard to answer in this short time. Does that work?
Oh yeah. So what we usually do is we'll have the recap, we'll have the video up there as well, and I'll make sure we include some of that retention stuff as well.
But great question, near and dear to my heart. Any other questions before we move on?
Looks like our friend Sandy has some. Sandy or Sandra says she has some questions, but she didn't list them specifically. So why don't you go ahead, and if she sends them in, I will bug you.
Okay, sounds good. How do I hide my webcam? I'll just put that down there. Okay, so our first scenario is how do we kind of bridge the idea of this inner loop and outer loop? So as we kind of talked about earlier, Teams is really for collaborating with your team and using the tabs to add the context. And that can be in context from Yammer as well. It's really great to use to triage Yammer responses and then just have a general awareness of the Yammer conversations. Whereas Yammer is a great way to have an area for people to talk to your team for people who aren't in your team. So maybe you're working on developing a new product and a salesperson has a question. They can post it into your Yammer group because they might not have permission to your team and still get in contact with you. I really think that it's easier to maybe show this. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into my team here. And here we have our DG 2000 launch team. So really quick, in case you haven't seen Teams, over here we have what we call channels. So we have one for design, digital assets, go-to-market plan, and then if we were to click on go-to-market plan, we have our conversations, which is where that chat is happening that we were talking about. We also have things like our files, which are technically stored in SharePoint, but you can see them here. We might also have things like a brochure, which is we want to highlight a specific document. Like in this case, it's a PowerPoint presentation. We might have a planner where we're managing tasks related to something. You know, this is for smaller projects where we don't require there to be enterprise resource planning, where we just have to manage it within our small group. And then we might have things like our roadmap or Power BI dashboards. So we'll show you in a second. There's a lot of things you can add to a tab. But in this case, we also have a group called Yammer. So in here, we have a couple things. So number one, we're getting notifications from Yammer whenever somebody posts in a certain group.
We're also getting notified when somebody uses certain keywords, like the name of our product, which is DG2000. The other thing we can do is add Yammer as a tab, which I think it's probably going to ask me to log in. Yes, it is. Oh, this is why I have, let me just grab that really quick. Apologies.
I'll tell you what, while you're grabbing that, Sandra sent in a few questions.
All right.
All right.
Excellent.
So she's actually sent in quite a few, so thank you, Sandra. We love questions. Starting at the top here, what happens if the team owner leaves the company and didn't have another team owner?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm gonna have to find that out and let you know. I apologize.
We can post some of the Q&A in our recap as well. Absolutely. Follow-up to that, I guess not follow-up, but second part of that, do all the teams show up in the admin portal for Office 365?
So they don't show up as like your traditional site collection. You can get a list of teams. So I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one too. I'm sorry. A lot of stuff just changed. Like I could give you the answer for 3 months ago, but I know it changed and I just haven't gone back and reinvestigated, which is part of the fun of working with Office 365, as I'm sure we all know now.
There you go.
Any other questions?
Yeah, quick follow-up. So our dear friend Ryan Scouten is on the webinar today, and he wanted to.
Oh, hey Ryan.
Hey Ryan, good to hear from you. A tenant admin can assign a new owner. So there you go.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, buddy. It's good to have you around. Let's see, where are we going from here? Does the conversation show up in Outlook when a new conversation is added in the team?
No. So that's one drawback to. So I think you're probably referring to if you're using Outlook Office 365 groups, there is a mailbox for that group, and then you can kind of see in Outlook the conversations, and those are different than the conversations in Teams. The only thing that you can kind of do to bridge emails and Teams is if you enable this as a tenant admin, you can see there's an email address per channel. Now the email address is kind of gibberish. Like you can't modify this email address or make it anything different. But if you were to use this, you could send an email to the team, but they still can't reply to the email in Microsoft Teams. And then just really quick, you can do advanced settings like about who can send the email address, or if you could remove it. But if you remove it, you can never get the email back. Like There's no way to unremove it. So be careful about that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Question from our friend Vaughn again. Where/how did you provision that team with Yammer, or is it a connector only?
Yeah, let's do that because there's something weird going on today. Like for one of the demos later, we log into our mobile device and join a meeting and none of the content's showing up, which has never happened to me.
Yeah.
And then like I just had to rejoin Yammer, which I just did this yesterday and it was working fine. So something weird is going on. I'm sorry. So instead, let's just show you how we connected this and redo the connector.
Gotcha.
So if you go into, I should have done it slower. So there's a little plus sign here. So I click that and it brings up a list of all the tabs that are available. Now there's a lot now, so sometimes we need to search. So if I was to search for Yammer, there is no Yammer tab. So this pink website one is your best friend. You can add anything that starts with HTTPS, so anything that's a secured site, as a tab. So you might do this to show a SharePoint list. You might do this if you have a library, a document library that relies on a bunch of metadata and you want to be able to show the metadata, use the website tab. So what I do is I'm going to go to Yammer here and I navigated to my DG2000 feedback group. I'm going to take the URL, which does start with HTTPS, and I'm going to go back to my team and paste it here, and I'll just call it Yammer again, Yammer 2, and click Save. Yeah, see, there's something weird going on here because this is supposed to be all hooked up. So I apologize for that. It's just one of the joys. So normally you would see the actual group here. Like literally, it wouldn't have that weird page. It would just take me straight to the group. So I'm sorry, that normally works seamlessly. Like all the billion times that I've done this, there must be something wrong with the service right now. It's the only thing I can think of. But that's how you would add it, and it would just be like an iframe in this window. The other thing we saw is that in our conversations area, we had some notifications that were being posted. So I want to show you really quick how we did that. So using a connector, which you hook up by clicking this ellipsis, the ... you can say, go to the connectors tab. So there's like many more connectors than tabs, which I'll show you. So many that they actually had to categorize them by area, like literally so many. But in this case, there is one for Yammer. And so what I did is just hit configure. And so the way to think about connectors is kind of like notifications for your phone. So I'm sure most of us have a smartphone at this point, and you have apps, and you can decide whether or not that app is allowed to send you push notifications, meaning if a certain criteria is met, like someone app mentions you on Twitter, or you get a new email, it'll show up as a notification on your phone. So kind of think of connectors as those notifications. So here we are saying it will send you a notification when, say, a certain message or a certain group, let's say our feedback group, when there's a new post, a reply, or an announcement posted in that group. So I want to get notified for all types of messages, and then I would save that. And then it's gonna, oh, I should have showed you, it can send you a digest daily, weekly, or it could do it immediately, just depending on how much posts you want to have in your group. So now if I were to look here, I've set up a notification so that it'll post in here whenever someone posts a message in that specific Yammer group. So an example up here is that I posted in the group. Here's the post, and it lets me know. I can either go directly to Yammer by clicking View Conversation, or let's say that someone asked a really good question and we didn't necessarily have the answer. So we, as a core working team, can have a conversation about it. So I don't know the answer. Maybe Adele does. And then Adele would be notified, she could reply here, and you can kind of coordinate the answer behind the scenes. And then to actually reply to the person, you'd want to go view the conversation. Yep, something's going on. And normally it would take you directly to that conversation. You wouldn't have to navigate to it, and you could post your reply there. The other way you can do a notification that's interesting, and we're just using the Yammer connector as an example. All the connectors have configuration options that are a little different, just that are most applicable to that connector. So in this case, I'm going to look for certain keywords. So whenever somebody mentions my product in any group that I have permission to, because it will do security trimming, I want it to tell me right away. So like, for example, in sales, I mentioned DG 2000. So I did this post a little bit ago. So because this was mentioned in a group that I have access to, because it's a public group, not a private group, I'm able to see that someone asked, when will the next version of DG 2000 be released? And because it had that keyword in it, it posts a notification to my group. So this is just an example of not only how you can use Yammer and Teams to kind of bridge the inner loop and the outer loop, but also how connectors and tabs work so that you can really customize your team and your channel to be applicable to what those people have to do every day. So that they're getting notifications and are finding out about things in one place. Like I just keep Teams open all day personally, because I've configured these to have all the information I need from a bunch of different places in one user interface. And it's just easier than having a bunch of tabs open, which is what I used to do. So we'll just pause for a second and see if there's any questions.
It's like
Yes, there
you
are.
knew that there were questions. So I'm gonna jump around
I'm
a bit.
gonna let you look. Yeah.
I'm gonna jump around through these a little bit because a couple of them are not necessarily on topic, but I want to come back to them. So let's start with our friend.
Sure.
I believe it's Deji. If I am pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me. He says I have much less connection items within the 3 dots menu. Why would that be, or why is that?
Sure. So actually, because we were troubleshooting this issue before the call, I think I actually have this open. So in the Office 365 Admin Center in Microsoft Teams, you can actually decide like what things people can work with. You can also, you can see here, like these are all the connectors. So what's happened is somebody in your tenant admin has decided certain things that you can see and certain things that you can't see. So that's something that's set at the global level for all teams.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And then our friend Vaughn has another question. By looking at your teams, you have one team with SharePoint, one Yammer, Office 365 integrated with Yammer, which comes with SharePoint site as well. Am I right?
Does Yammer come with a SharePoint site? I don't know that it does. But I think your question is around like, does it get confusing about having multiple places to store things? Oh, you know what you can do in Yammer now is if you were to upload a file, you can say, now you're going to see all of my stuff. You can, I think, designate, does it get put in a certain place or not? And I just don't know enough about Yammer to know if you can configure that to be a certain site or not. I just honestly don't use Yammer a ton, and I don't know.
Alrighty, there you go. He does say open Yammer on the right pane. That helps out at all.
Open
and then
Yammer on the right pane.
Yeah, for what it's worth. And then Igor, a friend of ours, you can integrate Yammer with Office 365 groups. So there you go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Much
So
appreciated.
because the Office 365 group is the same as the teams, like if you had a team called sales and you had a Office 365 group called sales, I mean, assuming that the team and the group have been associated with each other, they're using the same SharePoint site for files. So I'm assuming that if you can attach a Yammer group to the Office 365 group, it would be the same area for files, but please test that before going forward, because I don't know for sure.
Wonderful. Okay, I don't know why my
These are the best questions I've ever gotten.
These are really fun questions. Thank you guys for sending these in. Okay, so let's stay with this one. So our friend Deb Thayer, hi Deb, thanks for asking a question. Can you change the location of where documents are saved when you are in Teams, i.e. to an existing SharePoint site?
No, unfortunately you cannot. So basically what happens is every team has a document library. I'll just open this in SharePoint. Hopefully it doesn't give me a weird error again. And essentially it's the shared documents library that's automatically created with that SharePoint site. And then each channel gets a folder in that. And so there isn't a way to change, I'm just going to give up, I'm sorry. There isn't a way to change that location. The only thing that you could do is, and this isn't related to, you could add a storage location that is a different SharePoint document library. And then of course you could also use these other storage locations, and all of this can be toggled on or off per, like you could turn off just box in the tenant admin settings. So if I was to do this, let's hope it comes up with some relevant sites here. Let's say electronic events, and then it's going to ask me to choose, you know, a specific document library. So this is the default one. Let's choose electronic articles, and it's going to show up as a folder, unfortunately, in this list. But you'd have to tell people, you know, click on this folder to put it there, because if they just click upload, it's going to go to the general documents library in that site. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
It does to me.
Okay.
Hopefully that works out. Thank you.
It's a little user training.
Oh,
Yeah.
and Deb says yes. Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay.
Excellent job. And then Igor again, he posted a link to a Yammer support. For I'll make sure that gets into our recap for anybody who wants to check that out.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that. And then I've got two more questions that are kind of taking a step back, jumping back into Outlook. Do you want to answer those now, or do you want to save those for the end?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's go for it. All right, our friend Sandra, the question machine. What functionality, if any, doesn't work if we do not have Outlook online?
So that's an interesting question. Actually, I was at SharePoint Saturday Vancouver 2 weeks ago, and I don't know if you guys know Sherman, but he's a longtime SharePoint member. So he and I are testing that right now, because there is no documentation anywhere about this, and he has a situation where they're using Outlook on premises. The thing is, all these conversations are stored in that Office 365 group mailbox in a hidden folder that you can only access using PowerShell or using the content search functionality. So if you don't have Exchange Online, we don't know how that affects it. So we're currently running tests, actually, so won't have an answer probably for another week or two. So sorry about that.
All good, all good. Thank you for that. And then last question, again from our friend Deji. Practical question: how to add a website not using HTTPS protocol?
You can't.
There you go.
It has to be HTTPS, unfortunately, because this is a secured area. It has to be a secured site.
Gotcha. There you go. And that is the end of the questions for now. Thanks for entertaining that. Go on.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to go into our next scenario. So this is video conferencing. So specifically, a lot of times, like in developer stand-ups, where you want to mimic the face-to-face conversation the best you can. And this has been kind of a pain point in Skype for Business up till now. If you've ever done a video conference, the little like window where the person's head is like, it's really small, and you can't make it full screen. You can't make it any bigger than what it is. And so it's just not a face-to-face experience. Now, in Teams, it becomes more of that full screen experience. And like, this is an example of a daily stand-up. These are my RecordPoint colleagues, and there's 7 of us in this meeting. So similar to Skype, when somebody speaks, they become the upper left box on the screen. And then let's say Paul spoke next, they would switch, and then Savannah would go over here, and then it would continue on. But the brilliant part is when you're having a one-on-one conversation, which normally we would demo, but we were just having that weird error. I'm just going to check really quick and make sure that it hasn't resolved itself. Ooh, it's loading. No. Normally we would just do a quick demo showing you how amazing the video is. When to have that kind of one-on-one face-to-face conversation with someone, it's like having a chat in person. So we're gonna have to just imagine a little bit that in Teams here, let me just go to Teams. If we were to start a meeting,
like this one that I had set up for our webinar. We can join it. And Teams is full screen, so I can like do things to, you know, make it full screen here. Come on. And the person's face would fill the entire black box. So it is, and it's in high definition, and it just looks really great. So seeing is believing. I'm sorry that today we're having so many technical difficulties, but I would highly encourage you to try this out, especially if you're working with people in different offices that you don't get to see face to face all the time. So yeah, check that out. So then the next one is, the next high value scenario is start to think about Teams as a part of a larger workflow. So for example, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Power Apps and Flow, but this solution is using Power Apps, Flow, and Power BI for reporting, and then Microsoft Teams as well. And this comes from Paul Coombsy, who's in Perth, Australia, and he's the one that really came up with this idea, so I want to give him full credit. So essentially what happened is he was working with a client where safety is extremely important, and they measure themselves on how long they've gone without an accident. And they wanted to create a way for people to proactively report safety issues so that they could be addressed before anyone was hurt or there was an incident. So these people are working in, you know, factories, or, you know, they're not working at a computer workstation. So they need to be able to do this using their phone. So using Power Apps, he created an application where someone could click and report a safety concern. It would ask them to fill out information like the scope of the issue, what area it was in, and they could add things like a recorded video from their phone. They could take photos, if they could write a note, or they could even just click audio and record, you know, a narrative about the issue, so that it would take less time than typing it all out. Then they would be asked to assign a priority to the issue and attach any evidence such as a past issue. And then they click done. So once this was submitted, it would use Flow to route the submission to the correct document library that was based on the area that was selected. So, you know, different team sites were in charge of, I'm just going to make up some areas because we can't talk about the customer, but let's say it was a certain area of the factory that did sewing versus the one that did cutting out of the patterns. It would route this concern to the correct area using Flow. So then someone would get a notification saying, hey, there's a new concern. And they would look at it and they'd say, yes, this is a valid concern. At that point, they had a team set up with subject matter experts from each area. So let's say for pattern cutting. So then using the connectors, they would have it send a notification to the team saying, hey, there's a new safety concern related to pattern cutting. Please take a look. So in that notification, there's a link to the form where they can review the information. And then they used Microsoft Teams to have a chat about what should be done. So that's just an example of how the chat functionality in Teams and having kind of those predefined groups of people in the team already was able to be a part of a larger workflow. So while Teams can be a place to do your daily work, it could also just be one small portion of a larger solution. Any questions? I'm not seeing anything at this time, but just
No.
let me know if there's any questions.
Absolutely, you're good to go.
So the next thing you might try to do, and this works for some people and not for others, but is to build a bot. So the biggest, most common one, there's already a lot of bots in Teams. So this is just a screenshot of how many ones there already are. And all of these are chat bots where you are actually having a conversation with the bot. So for example, you might be asking the calendar bot or the secretary bot even,
to say, help you schedule a meeting where she's checking different people's calendars and, or I should say she or he are checking calendars and bringing back the times when everyone in the group would be available to meet. There's also bots that do more like a poll or a survey, like for example, the Polybot, where you might have them create a poll asking your team members to choose one of 3 options. And then everyone would select that option, and then it then provides you a nice report of the findings. Really, the bots fall in a couple categories. They help you schedule something, they help you survey something, or there's a couple that just have a broader scope. Like for example, I love the Busy bot, this one here, BIZZY, because what it does is it provides chat functionality to an existing Microsoft flow. So for example, you might have a flow that went out to your SharePoint site calendar and looked at the next 3 upcoming events and then returned that as the answer, like what are the next upcoming events. So Busy provides the chat functionality where you could say, hey, at Busy, what are my next 3 upcoming events? And it's using that flow to retrieve the information, and then it says your next upcoming 3 events are, and it lists them out for you. But it can provide that chat functionality to any Microsoft flow that you write, as long as you put the commands in there. So if you are thinking about using Teams as the chat interface for another to enable another business process, try looking at the Busy bot as a way to do that chat, so you're not having to like write it from scratch every time. The other thing that people do is build an FAQ bot. So if you are, say, you know, a computer help desk or HR, and you have a standard set of FAQs already written, it's actually quite easy to build a bot where that people can ask the questions to, so that you're not having to have a human being answer them every time. In fact, Joanne Klein has a very clear step-by-step instructions about how to build a bot in less than an hour that does this. The cool thing is your Q&A, like the questions and the answers, can be in almost any format. It could be a Word document, an Excel sheet, a web page, a SharePoint site, which is essentially a web page. You don't have to rewrite that Q&A in a certain format. You can just point the service at that existing Q&A, and then the bot will use that for its answers. So then the next thing that people find really helpful is, this is for project management, but using Planner integrated with Teams to track tasks. So going back to our team, just waiting for it to go. If we go to our go-to-market plan, on here for our product launch event, we're actually surfacing a existing Planner plan where we have our tasks and our team members, and we're able to track what needs to be done right here in Teams, where we're already having conversations and working. And as of a couple months ago, the features that are available using Planner and Microsoft Teams are the exact same features that you would get if you navigated to Planner using a web browser. So I can do things like modify an existing task. I can assign it to multiple people. I can tag it, like for here I have like waiting or blocked. You can set what your progress is, what project management bucket it falls into. You can even add a checklist of other things that need to be done. And you can even show this checklist on the actual card. You can attach related files, which includes links to SharePoint items, which would be your Teams files. And you can just generally add comments. And there is no save button. I just click out of this and it's updated. And here's my nice little card. I have to-do items that I can just check off without even having to open it. And then I can also do things like change the view of the content, like who is it assigned to, what's my progress, what's overdue versus in the future, and then what's waiting or blocked. So, if you're not having to coordinate tasks and resources and people's time across multiple projects, and you just want a way for people to track stuff and get it done, Planner is a pretty good way to do that. If you're already using something else like Asana or whatnot, there's also tabs available for a lot of the common project management tools like Asana, and there's a Trello one in here somewhere. Yep, Trello. So if you already have invested in a different tool, those are available. Otherwise, Planner is a good option.
A question
So
came
I think
in real quick.
question.
Yes, sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you. From our dear friend Sandra, do the team tasks show up in Outlook either online or on-prem?
All right, so do the Planner tasks show up in Outlook? Not yet. I think that's like one of the #1 requested items on user voice right now, is to have those show up in Outlook. So you might have heard of a tool called Microsoft To Do. It's where it's like, it used to be Wunderlist, and then they got rid of that and did To Do. Like, those tasks will show up in Outlook, but not the Planner tasks yet. I really encourage you to upvote it in user voice, because I have upvoted it, I think, all of my points.
And that was just that one question, so moving right along.
Great. So it looks like we have 8 minutes left. I think we're about at the end. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is just like lessons learned. And these are from both 3 in-depth pilots that I did with some pretty major organizations like Expedia, which is an online travel agency, and a couple other big name companies, as well as all these interviews. So there was some pretty clear common lessons learned. So first of all, Microsoft Teams doesn't work for every organization. If you have a much more formal organization where, being able to chat with people informally is really frowned upon, Teams might not be for you. So really look at your culture and whether or not this tool might be a good fit for it before deciding you're going to roll it out. The other thing is, as you kind of got a small glimpse of in this presentation, there's a lot of things you can do in Microsoft Teams, and it can be very overwhelming for users, especially if, like, not all of us are geeks about technology. And so if they're just not excited about learning it, it can be just a lot to dig through. So have kind of what we would call in marketing a drip email campaign, where you're sending out one tip every week that addresses one of their pain points. So for example, if you were working with an engineering group, you might first say, hey, if you want to have a better video meeting, here's how Microsoft Teams video works, and maybe get them to start using that. Wait a week or two, and then introduce the idea of using a connector into their bug tracking system so they can be notified when a bug happens and have a conversation in Teams about what to do about it. And then go on from there. So just basically don't overwhelm people, because there's a lot there. Collaboration tool is fatigue is a real thing. So at one of our pilot customers, this was like the 3rd chat collaboration tool they tried to roll out in 2 years. And so people were just like, oh, whatever, it's just another tool that's going to fail. And it took us a lot longer to get that first success story than if, this was the first collaboration tool to come along in a while. So just when you're planning your resources, your project plan, and your rollout plan, if you've had a lot of other collaboration tools implemented or attempted to be implemented and it didn't work, and there's like kind of a negative perception about that, just make the duration of your project much longer. The other thing is you really need to utilize a change champion program when rolling out Teams. So specifically find those people that are really excited about using it. You want to give them special information and kind of more one-on-one help. And you really want to have like the change champions be the team owners. So they're like they're evangelizing within their team how to use things and do it. And then along that idea, have a specific Microsoft team that's just for those team owners or change champions, where it has Word documents with emails that they can use to highlight features in that kind of that drip campaign to roll out one feature each week. Have it a place where they can ask questions and answers when they don't know the answer, and just broader coordination. And then this is just a question I get asked a lot. Should I, now that Teams is pretty similar to Slack, shouldn't I just like replace Slack with Teams to save money? And I don't know if you guys have used Slack, but people love it. Like if you use Slack in your organization, there are people who are extremely passionate about it and using it. So just don't have that be your first project. You need to like earn the right through success to replace Slack with Teams. And that's just going to take time and getting success stories and building up a positive impression of Teams. Also, depending on how people use Slack, there isn't a one-to-one feature parity yet. Like for example, in Slack, if you're a developer, you can share code snippets and it'll be nicely formatted. In Teams, you just can't do that yet. It'll look like garbage. So also look at how people use Slack and if it does actually make sense to replace at this time. I see my favorite red question bubble.
Yeah, I was going to let you finish getting through that, but there are a couple. Starting with our friend Vaughn. How mature is Teams right now? Do you suggest to wait or start using it now? It's a great question.
Yeah, great question. So I think unlike other Microsoft products, when they released what they called their MVP, their minimum viable product in November of 2016, it was a very robust minimum viable product. And then they have been releasing new features like every 1 to 2 months ever since then. Like it's very obvious Microsoft's spending a lot of money on this and really making it robust. So to answer your question, yes, I do think that it is mature enough now where you're going to get a lot of value from it. It's been over a year since I've thought, gosh, I wish that was just better. It's been a long time since it has been at a good tool and ready to roll out for quite a while now.
Great, thank you. And then our friend Sandra, she's got more of a comment than a question, but I do feel like it's something that you might be able to address. She says, I am a SharePoint admin and a global administrator with 10 plus years of experience. It is so confusing between SharePoint classic team sites, a modern team or communication site, and creating a team site using the team app. And every interface is different. Not a question, but an observation from an experienced user. I can definitely say from my own experience, that is confusing to me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the perfect PixelMill question because I've had conversations with Eric about it at conferences for sure.
Oh yeah.
And it is hella confusing. I don't even know what to tell you. Like, I think everyone hates it.
It is. There's not really a good answer to solving that other than just learning more about that stuff and learning which one is which. That's probably not a great answer, probably not the one you were looking for. It's something
that would be a great topic for a future webinar.
That is a good point. I should probably write that down.
Because there's people whose whole like I think, like for example, like Sue Hanley and others,
exactly
like their whole expertise that they're focusing on in their niche is to answer that question.
Exactly. It's such a great question. I'm sorry we don't have a better answer right now, but we will. And you might even see a webinar about it. Good idea. We may even pull in Erica because it was her idea.
No, I'm not. This isn't my niche expertise. Like, there's people who are experts in just that. Yeah.
Fair enough. And then one question from our friend Deb Thayer. How would you recommend viewing the team email when using the Teams app on iOS?
Okay, so the Teams email. Really quick question. Do you mean the email that are in Office 365 groups, or do you mean like the team conversations?
Miss Deb, whenever you're ready to answer that, feel free to add that back into the questions tab.
I'll get ready.
Erica is going to. She says email in Office 365 groups.
So you can't see Office 365 groups email from Teams, unfortunately. I wish they would add that as a connector. That would be awesome. So the only way to do that is through your Outlook app on your phone. And if you open the Outlook app underneath, I'm just going to do it in real time. Outlook app. So underneath, like, let me go to my RecordPoint email here. Where are groups? They used to be in here, I swear. Oh yeah. So under your mailboxes, there is an option that says groups. So you would need to find the specific group there and see the email from the Outlook app rather than the Teams app.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure you still have more session left, but we've got a whole buttload of questions coming in.
No,
so
that's the end of the slides.
There you go. So we have unofficially / officially moved into our Q&A session, guys. So keep those questions coming. They're really great. It's Erica's favorite part of these things is answering questions. So keep them coming. Next one comes from our friend Evangelist. He says, as an Office 365 admin, is there a way to list all of the groups and teams that are spin-offs by all enterprise users?
Is Ryan still on?
I think
Ryan, can you answer that?
Ryan is still here.
Because this is like really more of an IT pro question, and that is, and you know, even though Ryan's a bit more of a dev, he's a badass when it comes to this stuff.
This is true. Okay, so we'll put that question on hold, Avanesh, and Ryan will come back to that in just a second. I want to go to the next question while we're thinking about that. This is from our friend Vaughn. If I were to delete a team, will it delete all associated apps?
Okay, so if you delete a team, let me just practice do that. It'll delete literally everything. So let's go here. Let's say delete the team. So you will delete all channels, all chats, all files, and the Office 365 group. So you are literally, there's no way to say, I want to delete the team, but not the group, right? It is bombing everything. It'll delete the planner if you have a planner associated with the group, everything. Then it will go into a recycle bin for only 30 days, and you can only restore it using PowerShell. So,
mind blown. All right, so you're welcome, Vaughn. Thank you for that. Okay, so for Ryan, thank you for helping out, buddy. The question is, as an Office 365 admin, is there a way to list all the groups and teams that are spin off by all enterprise users? Spun off? I think it's supposed to be spun off. My apologies. I just read what's on the teleprompter. So
or basically like list all the teams and groups that have been created by users.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think you might have to use, I'm not even going to speculate. I don't know how to do it.
I've got Ryan says not through an interface at the moment. You can do it through Graph or PowerShell, and I apologize, Igor. You a couple questions up said you can use PowerShell for that. So there you go. Yeah. Twofold. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Hopefully that answered your question, Avinash. If we didn't, please ask another question. We'll go for it. That is all the questions in here for now. Avinash, right. Thank you. I had a question about bots earlier while you were talking about it, and now it's totally run away. So I don't know. If you have anything else you want to add, Erica, go right ahead. As we've kind of been doing Q&A this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever have any questions about anything related to Office 365 records management and compliance, that's where I spend most of my time these days. But I do use Teams on the regular as a power user. So you can always get a hold of me on Twitter or feel free to send me an email, and I'm always happy to help.
Exactly. Erica's a rock star, guys. Don't feel bad about bugging her. She loves it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we got another question from Sandra. Sandra, you are the question master today.
Love it.
I tested deleting a team a couple of weeks ago, but the Office 365 group wasn't deleted. I also previewed the new SharePoint Admin Center yesterday, and there's a column that identifies it as classic team site or a team site.
That's great to know. Thank you. Okay, so a couple questions. I completely believe that what you say is correct. I've just seen this happen other places where there was two groups by the same name. Like, for example, when they created a new team, instead of associating that team to an existing group, they just created another group with a very similar name.
So just make sure that isn't what happened in your testing. It might not have been. It might be just something to double check.
There you go. Wonderful. Thanks, Sandra. That's not really a question. All right, so we're out of questions temporarily again. I wish I could remember my question about bots.
Well, I think we're at the end of the time, aren't we?
We've got about 10 minutes left, so if anybody's got questions to send over, go ahead. While we're waiting to see if any more come in. So Igor actually has a comment. He says, I deleted a team today and everything was deleted within 30 minutes.
Yep. That's the other thing. It's run on a timer job, right? So yeah, it can take up to 30 minutes to delete, I believe.
Gotcha. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so again, while we're waiting to see if any more questions. Oh, and as I keep saying, let's wait for more questions. More questions come in. Avinash, can I summarize Teams? Oh, can I summarize? Teams is meant for small group of members with two great functions, chat and bots. Seems like a pretty great summary.
I would say yes, and connectors and tabs.
Yes.
Bots, connectors, and tabs.
Excellent. Okay, let's try this one more time and see if any questions come in. So, real quick, guys, thank you again for joining us today. Again, we're still here for a couple minutes, so send those questions in. I see one just popped in, but I'm actually getting through my spiel this time. We'll come back to it. If you have any, if you ever want to reach out to any member of the PixelMill team, hit us up on Twitter at PixelMillTeam or pixelmill.com. If you have questions for Eric specifically, at Eric Overfield, he's our president and co-founder, as I was talking about before. Erica, we can find you on Twitter, I believe, at Erica Toelle, right? Just your full name right there. And she's over at RecordPoint, so you can always check her out there. And check out our friends at RecordPoint. They're doing cool stuff. We like them. And then here we go, a question. Can you do a security and compliance webinar? Oh, we probably could.
Actually, I think when we were talking about the topic for this, maybe you guys said that would be a really great future topic.
I believe we did. Yeah.
And I'm ready to do that anytime. I just refreshed all the content. I'm doing a half-day workshop at SharePoint Saturday Nashville, or Cloud Friday Nashville, a week from tomorrow. So I literally just spent 120 hours testing and relearning everything, and I would love to share that with you in a abbreviated format.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, all right, you and I will chat about that. So there you go, Igor, you got your, we'll call it an early Christmas present, a very early Christmas present. We'll be doing a session on security and compliance sometime down the line. There you go. All right, he says yay. Yay for.
And also, I'm going to post those session materials a week from Friday, and I will put the link on my Twitter. So also, you can look through the slides, 3 hours of slides and whatnot, if that helps.
There you go. Wonderful. All right, guys. So I think that's the end of our time. Erica, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for everyone for joining us today as well. It's been great to have you. If you have any other questions, please, by all means, again, like I said, hit us up on Twitter at PixelMillTeam or hashtag PixelMillWebinars. You can also email us, info@pixelmill.com. We'd be happy to throw these questions at Erica. You can also hit her up on Twitter, like I said, at Erica Toelle. She'd be happy to answer your questions. And that's it. Next month, real quick, we'll be doing a recap of SharePoint Conference North America happening next month in Vegas. We'll have some members of our team as well as some of our partners from Kiefer Consulting will be joining us as well. And there you go. The more info of that will be available soon. And with that, again, thank you very much for joining us. Again, Erica, thank you very much. Guys, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you to everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you very much, guys. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.